How did Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming man from Wisconsin, become the Milwaukee Cannibal, one of the United States' most notorious serial killers? How did he avoid detection for decades as he committed 17 murders? Why was he beaten to death in prison? Find out in this BBBC News documentary special. Coming up next.
From our investigation, we feel that this individual strongly is involved in other homicides.
Police removed boxes and boxes of body parts, evidence of what appears to be a psychopathic mass murder. Authorities also took out a barrel of what they think is acid.
Bodies were found in an apartment of Jeffrey Dahmer.
And police now say more people may be dead than originally thought.
A 31-year-old man who admitted to killing victims in his apartment, then dismembering their bodies, may have murdered up to 17 people.
Jeffrey Dahmer, an unassuming chocolate factory worker, would eventually confess that he had seduced, murdered, and dismembered 17 young men. He even ate some of his victims' body parts.
Hi, and welcome to tonight's 8 o'clock episode of BBBC News, A Serial Cannibalist. Tonight, we will be discussing the former life of Jeffrey Dahmer, an insane lunatic who went on a murdering and cannibalistic spree in the Milwaukee region around the 1980s. Special guest with me today is Dr. and distinguished Professor Ben Dover. He now lives in London and currently lectures at the University of Oxford. Professor Dover, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Now, the viewers and I have a couple of questions for you about Jeffrey Dahmer. The first one being, could you please explain to us a little bit about him? What do you know about him?
Okay, so Mr. Dahmer was a man who lived in Wisconsin, and around 1978, he started committing a series of murders. Of course, there was a little period where he was enlisted in the army, as a result of which he did not commit anything. But yeah, he was, in a nutshell, a man who committed 17 murders in his life and pretty much never actually repented for any of them and thought they were all justified. And he resorted to sometimes eating body parts of his victims, sometimes performing sexual, activities on his victims after their death, and a lot of other things that one might consider crazy. But Mr. Dahmer was not, in fact, contrary to popular belief, clinically diagnosably insane.
It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier.
Okay, so you say he wasn't insane. However, I think he's a lunatic. So could you explain to us perhaps why I think he might be a lunatic and why you don't? Talk to us about his childhood.
Well, first of all, he was not, according to accepted psychological definitions of insanity, not an insane person by clinical standards. And on top of that, speaking of his childhood, he had a relatively normal childhood, except for the fact that his family, his parents had a little bit of marital issues going on. His father was studying at the time.
Yes. Let me guess. The theory of the neglected parents.
I'm actually unaware of such a thing. I doubt that that's a scientific theory of sociology. But what does apply in this case is the Moffat's theory of developmental taxonomy. So what that primarily suggests is that there's a lot of different kinds of teenagers. Some teenagers, a small fraction, never end up committing any sort of crime, and that's a very small fraction. The largest majority of adolescents take part in what's known as adolescence limited criminality. What that means is people commit a lot of not just crime, but take part in a lot of activities that are against the norm, but that activity stops at the end of adolescence and beginning of early adulthood. However, there's a smaller fraction of people who end up committing these kind of crimes for the remainder of their life, and these people are known as life course criminals. So that theory does apply in this case, but not the other made-up what I assume is made up theory.
So what you're telling me is that Jeffrey Dahmer was a life course criminal?
Yes, I am.
When did he start having these thoughts that he wanted to engage in criminal behavior?
Oh, so are you like asking me for the motivations behind?
Yes. What were the motivations behind?
So based on a lot of interviews with Mr. Dahmer, his motivations were primarily sexual nature. He had obsessive desires to dominate over other men. Although he was a gay man, and he admitted that to being attracted to other men, he would never admit being gay. That was a weird thing somehow. Although he would frequently visit gay bars and pick up young men, and he would have a desire to dominate young men. And in his own words, his first murder was never actually planned to be a murder. He simply wanted to dominate over another young man that he picked up. He was a hitchhiker that he picked up, and all he wanted to do is dominate him in a sexual manner. And when he did not comply, he ended up murdering him and performing whatever sexual acts he intended to with the dead man, because dead men cannot dominate back. So that was primarily what his motivations were. They were all sexual.
Okay.
I had these obsessive desires and thoughts wanting to control them, to, I don't know how to put it, possess them permanently.
And that's why you killed them.
Right. Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me. And as my obsession grew, I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons.
So I'm a little confused. You say that he is not a lunatic,
yes,
as I presume he is. However, you do say that he wanted to have complete control over his victims. Can you explain to me a little bit, what was he like as a person?
So there's a lot of other things apart from insanity that can explain these situations. For example, the problem behavior syndrome, that can be easily applied to this case.
The problem behavior syndrome, is that by the classist Cesar Lombardio?
That is not an actual man. I think you're thinking of someone else. But the point is, the problem behavior syndrome suggests that a lot of other traits, problematic traits, go along with the criminality of a person. Criminogenic thinking is not the only issue teenagers face. Early drinking, lying, deceptive attitude, all these other things exist within teenagers that are linked to criminogenic thinking. And a lot of these could be seen in Mr. Jeffrey Dahmer at a very early age. He would drink in class, he would lie to people, he would be fascinated with murder and like bones and cleansing and all those things. So all these are signs that tell us that it did not come out of nowhere. He was not suddenly into committing crimes of this nature. So looking at other problematic behaviors can give us a lot of information on what a person might be into doing in the future. Also, when you ask me what he was like, he was honestly quite reserved man after his surgery. He had a surgery before which he was a happy and outgoing person, but after that, he got to becoming quite reserved. And his teachers noted he was not a particularly bright individual in academics, but that is kind of in conflict with what we've observed in his interviews, where we've seen that this man is a pretty intelligent person who's capable of defending all of his actions, all of his murders, and explaining exactly why he did all the things that he did. In fact, that is what many people believe is what led to him not being arrested for like a good part of a decade.
The reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was able to get away with his crimes was because of just what you are seeing here. Jeffrey Dahmer is intelligent and articulate. That is what makes him so frightening. But if you listen carefully to his words throughout this interview, you realize it is a thin disguise. You do sound, though, like the kind of person who could have said to himself, "This is wrong. I must stop."
I always knew that it was wrong, but after the The first killing was not planned. I was coming back from the shopping mall back in '78. I had fantasies about picking up a hitchhiker and taking him back to the house and having complete control and dominance.
Very interesting. Could you explain to me and the viewers a little bit more about his lifestyle?
Funny that you mentioned that word of all, because fortunately enough for us, there's an actual sociological theory by the name of Walter's lifestyle theory that can be perfectly applied to this situation.
I thought it was called the theory of good living. My bad.
No, actually, it's the Walter's theory of lifestyle theory. Anyway, so the point of this theory is the fact that crime is just not a one-off behavior. Mm-hmm. It's in fact it's a pattern, a series of lifestyle choices that people make, and that manifests itself in a kind of a crime that people commit in the future. Now, in Dahmer's case, it's not that he suddenly decided to commit 17 murders across a decade out of nowhere. Like, it wasn't a thing that he just started doing. So if you look at his lifestyle, although he did work at a chocolate factory, he himself stated in one of the interviews that he gave that he was not interested in anything in life apart from dominating men, and even if that means the men being dead, to avoid any sort of fights or like control. So he was only interested in power, sexual control, dominating young men, and doing that with all means necessary, even if it means killing them. And he was also obsessed with these men to the extent that he would preserve these bones and other body parts of these men, eat their hearts and biceps and other muscles. And this went on for a decade and became a lifestyle habit. And not just after he started committing these crimes, but even before that. Ever since we've talked about the chicken bones and his father teaching him how to preserve chicken bones, it started with that at a very early age, and it kept on going for his whole life. It was a thing of a lifestyle, and not just crime that was committed just because of decisions he made on the spot.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Listen to him talk about the most unnatural things in the most matter-of-fact of ways. That's when you realize that none of it has touched him.
I was branching out. That's when the cannibalism started, eating of the heart and the arm muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me. At first it was just curiosity, and then it became compulsive.
As you know, Jeffrey Dahmer is he's dead. So explain to me and the viewers how Mr. Dahmer died.
So, Mr. Dahmer, of course, given the fact that he was serving 999 years of prison time, he was killed in prison. He died at a very young age, and he was murdered by a fellow cellmate when the murderer, and another person were together on an assignment to clean bathrooms. So what had happened was this person who ended up killing Dahmer was, for the most part, just mad at him, that he would taunt the cellmates with making body parts out of food and chopping them up in front of people. And the worst part was that he never repented, according to his murderer, and that bothered him. So one day he just was in the bathroom with him, and he had a metal bar with him, and he just flung it out and killed him.
Fellow inmate Christopher Scarver severely bludgeoned Dahmer with a 20-inch metal rod. He was rushed to the hospital and died an hour later. The third inmate, Jesse Anderson, was also beaten. He died in the hospital the next day.
If you were to have a chance to interview him one last time and ask him one final question, what would it be and why?
I would, let me think about that for a second. I don't know. A lot of what we want to know about him have been asked to Dahmer, but I would ask him if there was something that could stop him, if there was something we could do to help these kind of people, to prevent this from happening in the future. Like, is there anything that can stop these people? Can we have helped him? Can we have stopped him from doing the things that he did? Or can we stop another person, another Jeffrey Dahmer, from being born? What would that be? I would like to know from his perspective.
Could someone like you be stopped? Could you be helped?
No, I was dead set on going with this compulsion. It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.